Hey guys, tonight we're going to begin in a quiet Anatolian field where sheep outnumber soldiers, and the only thing more peaceful than the stars is the sound of a future empire not yet realizing it exists. You're lying under the moonlight now, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket, surrounded by bleeding ewes and the snore of a herdsman who has absolutely no idea that his son will one day found the Ottoman Empire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing our little sleepy history circle grow. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It all begins around the year 1299. You're in a borderland, the edge of the old Seljuk Sultanate of Rum. Not Rome, mind you, but Rum, a land now mostly made up of Turkish tribes, stragglers from collapsed empires, and the kind of goats that seem to judge you silently. Among these clans is one led by a man named Ertugrul, and more importantly, his son Osman. That's Osman with a soft S, which you will inevitably mispronounce as Osman, like a medieval rock star. He wouldn't mind. Osman dreams big. There's no grand palace yet, no domed mosques or tulip gardens, just tents, worn boots, and the aroma of stewed lamb drifting from a cast iron pot. Osman's world is one where tribal loyalty matters more than laws, and where authority comes not from a crown, but from charisma cattle, and maybe a little divine favor, or at least a good story. The tale goes that Osman had a dream, a literal dream. He sleeps in the house of a Sufi mystic, probably after too much lamb, and sees a moon rising from the mystic's chest entering his own, and then a great tree springing forth from his navel. You know, standard symbolic dream fare. Historians still argue whether this dream ever occurred or was invented later to legitimize his rule. Either way, Osman wakes up feeling prophetic. He begins gathering warriors, not conscripts, mind you, but eager ghazis or holy fighters. These aren't monks with spears. They're more like part-time bandits with a religious PR campaign. The ghazis love two things: looting Byzantines and telling bedtime stories about it afterward. They raid the fading Byzantine frontiers, occasionally leaving goats in better shape than towns. Osman proves skilled not just in battle, but in alliance building. He marries the daughter of a respected cleric. Political romance, the oldest empire trick in the book. His growing beylik, essentially a tribal domain, becomes a sort of sleepy magnet for other nomads looking for someone competent and not completely unbearable to follow. But this is where it gets weird. The Ottomans weren't supposed to be the ones. Several Turkish clans were bigger, richer, or more strategically placed. Think of Osman's group as the underdog startup operating out of a garage tent. And yet, by sheer persistence and clever alliances, they slowly carve out a niche, literally, into the Byzantine frontier. Town by town, fort by fort, the Ottomans expand. One early prize is the fortress of Yenishehir. Not a glamorous place, more sturdy stone square than palatial delight, but it gives them a capital, a base. You, the listener, are now trudging along its uneven cobbled streets, dodging chickens and the occasional armored horseman who may or may not be lost. Osman dies around 1323. Leaving behind a realm barely scratching the term empire. His son Orhan takes over, and it's Orhan who really kickstarts the transformation from nomadic clan to bureaucratic force. But even so, the early Ottomans maintained their sleepy vibe, no sharp uniforms, no towering cities, just rough, loyal fighters and soft, repetitive drum beats guiding them through the misty dawn. Historians still debate how much of Osman's myth was carefully constructed after the fact. The tree, the dream, the prophetic marriage, it all feels a bit tidy. Yet whether truth or tale it worked. The name Ottoman itself comes from Osman Ottoman, being the Western mispronunciation of Osmanolu, or son of Osman. Over time, this sleepy shepherd becomes the father of a dynasty that will last over 600 years. For now, though, you're in the field again. The sheep are quiet. The stars have shifted. Osman sleeps in his tent nearby, his sword beside him, his mind possibly still wandering the branches of that dream tree. You pull your wool blanket tighter and drift. You wake to the sound of distant hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, and muffled in morning dew. The sheep are still there, snoring softly, but now you're following Orhan Osman's son as he takes the reins. And not just metaphorically, he's literally on horseback, wearing a helmet that looks more decorative than practical, and a silk sash tied in a way that says, "I'm figuring out this whole empire thing." Orhan is a transitional figure, the guy who inherits a tent and slowly turns it into a palace. He's not flashy, but practical. You watch him decide quite calmly that this whole raiding with spears thing needs a touch of bureaucracy. One of his smartest moves, minting coins. Coins. The Ottomans now have currency with their own names on it. Nothing says, "I'm legitimate," like forcing people to carry tiny portraits of your ego in their pockets. But don't worry, the coins aren't glamorous. They're small, simple, and made of metal that's almost insultingly humble. Still, merchants begin accepting them. Taxes start being counted in something other than goats. And slowly, the Ottomans shift from tent to town. You stroll now through Bursa, which Orhan takes in 1326. After a siege that's more passive-aggressive waiting than dramatic clash, Bursa becomes the first real Ottoman capital, and it's oddly serene. The streets are lined with quiet markets, domed bathhouses puffing gentle steam, and mosques that rise like sleepy giants above the town. The mosques matter. Orhan builds one called the Orhan Ghazi Mosque, a modest but elegant structure with low arches and acoustics so soft you could probably hear a nap happening across the prayer hall. Religion and architecture go hand in hand now. Every brick seems to say, "We're here to stay, but let's not rush." Meanwhile, in the palace, or what passes for one, you hear discussions not of glory or vengeance, but of cloth imports, marriage alliances, and trade routes. The Ottomans are learning that you can't build an empire on raids alone. You need road scribes and the occasional census taker with very neat handwriting. And then there's the military. Orhan starts forming a more professional army. No more part-time raiders with passion, but poor hygiene. He introduces a new corps, the Janissaries. Now this isn't yet the full-blown elite fighting force, with uniforms and spooky discipline that comes later, but it's the seed of it. You see a young boy being trained, eyes wide, hands blistered, from learning to hold a sword and a pen with equal precision. Historians still argue whether Orhan was more statesman or sleepy general. Some say he lacked the fire of his father. Others say he was exactly what the Ottomans needed: a planner, a builder, a soft-spoken strategist who understood the art of enduring. He didn't conquer massive lands, but he laid the roads to them, literally. One of his odder decisions, marrying Theodora, a Byzantine princess. That's right. The big scary Ottoman Ghazis are now sipping tea with the Byzantine elite. It's all very awkward. At first, imagine the dinner table talk. But it works. The Ottomans gain influence without drawing a sword, and you, still wandering through time, get a front row seat to one of history's quieter power plays. There's even a bit of educational reform. Scholars begin copying texts, libraries quietly emerge, and a generation of Ottoman boys start learning not just how to fight, but how to read. You peek over the shoulder of one, watching him sound out ancient Persian poetry while trying not to spill his ink. And yes, the Sultan's Orhan, now included, have beds. Feathered plush beds. No more tent floor napping. The palace interiors are simple but refined. Carpets from Anatolia, brass lamps that flicker like fireflies, and cushions. So many cushions. Ottoman comfort culture is already becoming a thing. One night, Orhan visits his father's tomb. You follow silently as he kneels, whispers something into the cold marble, and walks away with that look of someone who carries legacy like a heavy cloak. He's not flashy. He never claimed to be. But he will be remembered as the Sultan who turned a wandering tribe into a grounded state. As the moon rises again over Bursa, the call to prayer echoes in soft waves. You sit by a fountain, the kind where turtles lazily paddle around coins tossed in by travelers. Everything moves slowly but forward. And so do you. You're riding now, not galloping, not trotting, just gently swaying on the back of a dusty horse that knows its route better than you do. The trail is lined with thorn bushes and the occasional sleepy hawk watching from a tree. This is Ghazi country, and you're spending the day with the frontier warriors who built the Ottoman name into something worth whispering. The Ghazis are a strange bunch. Part holy warrior, part raider, part very tired man with a sword. You pass a makeshift barracks where one snores loudly beneath a tent held up by optimism and one pole. Another sharpens a blade while reciting verses from the Quran. A third is just trying to boil lentils with a helmet that's doubling as a pot. These warriors live at the very edge of empire's maps and probably personal hygiene. Their raids against Byzantine outposts are as much ritual as strategy. There's a code, you see, a sense of frontier justice, and also an unspoken competition over who has the best mustache. You reach a small fort. It's not impressive, just stone stacked with ambition. But here, the Ghazis gather. They swap tales that may or may not be true. Did you hear about Malik? Took down a knight with a chicken bone. Laughter spit, and the smell of leather and onions fill the air. You sit among them, offered flatbread, so dry it could be armor. But it's not all raiding. These men pray 5 times a day, like clockwork. When the call sounds, they stop what they're doing, mid-meal, mid-sentence, even mid-boast. It's jarring, actually. You're mid-laugh at a joke about goat thieves when everyone suddenly lines up on a rug that wasn't there a moment ago. And then silence, stillness, dust hanging in sunbeams. Historians still argue how holy these Ghazis truly were. Some say they were nothing more than organized looters with religious branding. Others argue they sincerely believed they were enacting divine will. Probably both. Probably neither. Like most things, the truth is asleep somewhere in between. At night they sing. Not loudly, this is a sleepy empire in progress, remember, but with soft voices and stringed instruments that look half-finished. Songs about past battles, lost comrades, and the women they imagine are still waiting for them back home. You're pulled into the rhythm before realizing half the lyrics are about not having clean socks. There's no uniform among them. One wears Byzantine mail, repurposed with bits of wool. Another has a turban that's less religious statement and more protection from bird droppings. Yet they move as a unit when raiding. You ride with them at dawn. Once hooves thundering across wet grass swords, raised not to kill indiscriminately, but to assert control, to test boundaries, to stake a claim that the Ottoman name matters here now. Sometimes the towns they attack surrender without a fight. Other times, not so much. A skirmish breaks out at one point, a brief blur of shouting smoke and splinters. But the Ottomans don't burn the village. They install a local judge, offer tax terms, leave behind someone with a clipboard. The Ghazis grumble, but it's policy now. The empire is learning restraint even in its wildest corners. And yet the Ghazi life isn't all strategy and symbolism. You share a tent with one named Hamza. He tells you of his donkey, which ran off mid-battle. He never found it. Claims it was smarter than him. Every night, he leaves a bit of bread near the edge of camp. Just in case he shrugs. You don't laugh. You just nod. Somehow, this feels right. There's a letter read aloud, sent from Bursa. Orders, praise, instructions. The Ghazis cheer at the praise, ignore the orders, and mostly just wipe their hands before touching the scroll. But they listen. The Sultan's words carry weight even here. The balance of freedom and loyalty is delicate, but it holds. You ride again the next morning, the air cold and sweet. The sun glints off a broken helmet tied to your saddle. A village appears in the distance, smoke curling from its chimneys like yawns made visible. Another day, another raid, another song waiting to be written around a sleepy fire. The horse-drawn cart creaks beneath you as you approach a village just waking from centuries of silence. Children yawn from behind lattice windows, roosters offer opinions uninvited, and smoke curls lazily from breakfast fires. But today, something is different. The villagers are whispering. Mothers clutch their sons a little tighter. You've arrived on the same morning as the devshirme. The system is called devshirme, or the collection, and it's the strangest job interview in history. Ottoman officials, robes brushed, faces politely blank, are here to select Christian boys, usually from Balkan villages, and whisk them off to become elite soldiers of the empire. The janissaries, you might think the villagers would scream. Sometimes they do, but more often they sigh. It's not quite kidnapping. Not exactly. It's framed as opportunity. One mother watches her boy taken and says, "He'll eat better than we do." Another mutters, "At least he won't freeze next winter." These aren't proud farewells, but neither are they rebellions. It's complicated. Historians still argue whether devshirme was cruel subjugation or reluctant social mobility. You trail the selected boys on their long walk. They carry little a worn loaf of bread, a charm from home, maybe a carved wooden horse. They don't cry. Most just blink dazed. You pass through hills, rivers, and old Roman roads still cracked from forgotten empires. By the time you reach the training barracks, the boys look older. Inside, silence rules. The Janissary system isn't chaotic. It's disciplined, rigid, and just a bit terrifying in its precision. The boys learn Turkish convert to Islam and train like they're preparing for a very organized apocalypse. They learn to fight, yes, but also to read, to debate, to stitch their own tunics without complaint. You observe one silently struggle to embroider a sleeve. A senior cadet walks by, corrects his form, and keeps walking. No yelling. Just standards. The Janissaries aren't just soldiers. They're a caste, an identity, a paradox, forbidden to marry, raised to be loyal only to the Sultan. You watch as one receives a ceremonial spoon, a sign of brotherhood. They wear it proudly tucked into their belts, like tiny declarations of unity. You try not to chuckle, but it's actually quite moving. They pray in unison. They drill in unison. They sleep oddly in rows that would make a librarian weep with joy. There's camaraderie, but also hierarchy. One boy excels with the bow, another with maps, another still tiny and quick becomes a master of evasion. They're sorted, honed, shaped. You realize they aren't being trained to serve. They're being trained to belong. You watch a ceremony, the graduation of sorts. It's hushed, solemn. No hats are thrown. Instead, each boy kneels before an officer, receives a hand on the shoulder, and stands changed. Not just dressed in the crisp white robes of a janissary, but taller somehow. Calmer. You look for the boy from earlier, the one with the carved horse. He's there, spoon-glinting eyes focused forward. The elite corps becomes the Sultan's right arm. Janissaries guard the palace, lead military campaigns, enforce law, and sometimes bend it. Power always breeds complexity. You hear stories whispered in taverns, Janissaries who rebel, who take bribes, who refuse to disband. But for now, they are heroes. Living weapons wrapped in silk and silence. One night, you overhear a janissary singing softly. Not a battle hymn, a lullaby. Something from the village he can no longer name. You lie awake afterward, staring at the ceiling beams, and wonder if he dreams in Turkish or his forgotten mother tongue. The next morning, drills begin again. You step aside as the corps marches past, each boot hitting the earth with that oddly gentle thunder. They do not smile. They do not speak. But one boy, just one glances sideways and nods. The city smells of jasmine and wet limestone. You enter through a gate flanked by sleepy guards in embroidered sashes, their eyes half-lidded, but hands never far from their scimitars. This is the early Ottoman capital in full-bloom Bursa, later Edirne and eventually Constantinople. But regardless of name, the empire now builds in stone what once only existed in dream. Today you're following an architect, not a warrior. His name is Ali, and his boots are coated in dust plaster and ambition. He's sketching out plans for a mosque with one hand while sipping bitter coffee with the other. He mutters to himself in Ottoman Turkish, a swirl of Persian elegance Arabic piety and Turkic bluntness. You just nod. It's better that way. The mosque is central now, not just as a place of worship, but as a symbol. You pass one under construction scaffolding made of rope and hope wooden cranes creaking like groaning elders. Workers mix mortar with bare hands and faith. A dome rises overhead, its frame like a rib cage holding up heaven. Inside, you're struck by the quiet. These spaces are designed not to impress, but to hush. The acoustics soften footsteps. The light slants in like it's tiptoeing. Even the calligraphy whispers. You stand beneath a mihrab, a prayer niche pointing toward Mecca, so intricately tiled it feels like it was carved from dreams. The Ottomans begin to perfect the architectural art of understatement. Not gaudy, not bland, just serene. Courtyards open into gardens with burbling fountains. Prayer halls remain cool, even in summer. You nap briefly in a corner, the stone cool against your cheek, as a pigeon wanders in and decides not to care about your presence. But it's not just mosques. Complexes rise up around them. Schools, kitchens, hospitals, libraries. They're called kuliyes, and they form the sleepy heart of every Ottoman town. The empire knows something that modern city planners often forget. If you want peace, you need fountains and soup. You sit in one of these kitchens. A cook hands you lentil stew and stale bread. He doesn't smile, but his ladle does. Outside, children run across mosaics that took a decade to finish. Elderly men discuss stars and camels. And somewhere nearby, a scholar is falling asleep on a manuscript about dream interpretation. Historians still argue how Ottoman architecture fused so seamlessly with Islamic art and Byzantine remnants. Some say it was intentional cultural diplomacy. Others say it just made aesthetic sense. Either way, you can see the Greek domes and Arab courtyards embracing like old cousins, reuniting after a long nap. Then comes the marble. Always the marble. Imported expensive, polished to a sleepy sheen. In one madrasa courtyard, you trace your fingers along a slab so smooth it feels like moonlight. Students in turbans scribble notes beside you. One is nodding off into his ink pot. You visit an early hammam or public bathhouse. The air inside is steamy, fragrant with lavender and last week's gossip. You strip off your time-traveling cloak and ease into warm stone. Bathers move like ghosts wrapped in towels, murmuring about taxes and the weather. One man offers you a bar of soap. It smells like olive trees and old secrets. Outside again, dusk falls. The minarets begin their quiet glow. Oil lamps flicker to life across courtyards, and cats claim the warmest stones. You climb a gentle hill and look out over the city, an empire now taking physical form. No longer whispers of conquest, no longer just dreams of unity. The Ottomans are building literally the world they want to rule. Below you, the architect Ali puts down his charcoal. He wipes his hands on his robe, examines his sketch, and says something under his breath. You don't catch it, but it feels like a blessing. Steam swirls around you, like mist from a lazy genie's lamp. You're reclining in a marble-walled hammam somewhere in 16th century Istanbul, and the heat is making your bones feel like softened bread. This is the world of Suleiman the Magnificent Emperor, legislator, poet, and very, very clean. He's not called magnificent for nothing. You peek into the palace at Topkapi where Suleiman lounges on a divan embroidered with threads finer than the jokes in his court poetry. He sips sherbet through a bejeweled straw, while his advisors read legal petitions, sort bribes with discretion, and practice not yawning. It's the golden age of the Ottoman Empire, and it smells faintly of rosewater and victory. Suleiman's empire stretches across 3 continents. His armies control vast deserts, forested mountains, and sleepy rivers winding through Hungary. Yet despite the reach, he governs like a man who genuinely enjoys paperwork. You're handed a scroll. It's a law code he drafted himself. Boring. Absolutely. But brilliantly boring. Everything from tax reform to divorce proceedings all neatly penned in imperial calligraphy. But don't let the robes fool you. Suleiman's early reign is full of action. You ride beside him through the siege of roads where cannon smoke stings your eyes and the knights within their walls look particularly unamused. Then on to Hungary Mohatch, where rain mud and battlefield chaos mix into a soup of slippery conquest. It's over fast. Too fast, really. Historians still argue whether Suleiman was a military genius or just lucky with logistics. Back at the palace, though, it's the hammams that define the mood. Ottomans believe in cleansing both body and spirit, and nothing says I run a continent like sitting naked with strangers under a domed ceiling, listening to soap slap gently against flesh. You're there now, sweating beside a judge, a eunuch, and a man who may or may not be an ambassador from Venice. No one talks. Everyone hums. You float next into the harem, not as a voyeur, but as an invisible guest, watching power in silk slippers. Hürrem Sultan Suleiman's favorite practically runs the place. She's more than a consort. She's a political player, a philanthropist, and someone who can cut you down with a look. She commissions mosques, writes letters to foreign rulers, and plays a long game of chess across the empire's inner court. And she does it all while managing an intensely competitive bubble of perfumed ambition. You visit one of her endowments, a soup kitchen. It feeds hundreds daily. Children nap under fig trees nearby. And the cook has a face like a donut left in the sun. She paid for this, he mumbles, ladling stew from her own dowry. The spoon steams. Suleiman, for all his splendor, has moments of sleepiness too. He writes poetry under a pen name, Muhibi, the lover. His verses are full of longing metaphors about stars and moths and enough sappiness to fill a fig tart. You hear him read one aloud, in the garden voice, low fireflies blinking in rhythm. But shadows creep in. His beloved friend and Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha. Once a slave rises too high and is abruptly executed. You're in the room when it happens, not during the act, thankfully, but in the silence afterward. The courtiers glance around, shuffle papers, pretend not to feel the chill. The Sultan says nothing. His pen scratches on. This age is one of contradictions, gleaming tiles, and sudden violence, poetic reforms, and political purges. The empire is strong but complex, comfortable but not complacent. You walk the halls of the Suleymaniye Mosque, his crowning architectural achievement. It's vast, yet peaceful, monumental, yet weightless. You whisper, the walls listen. Night falls over Istanbul. You're seated on a palace terrace overlooking the Bosphorus. The water shimmers like melted ink. Suleiman stands nearby, hands behind his back, silent. He's thinking of battles won, friends lost, laws passed, and perhaps, just perhaps, the poems he never finished. A breeze passes. He turns and walks inside. You stay behind a moment longer, watching the empire breathe in its golden dusk. You're in a smoky room now, low-ceilinged and echoing with quiet laughter. No swords hang on the walls. No battle plans are spread across the tables. Just cups of thick coffee, scattered playing pieces, and the gentle scratch of quills against parchment. Welcome to the Ottoman Coffee House, equal parts cafe, salon, and low-stakes panic room. The coffee hits your tongue like liquid night. It's gritty dark and oddly comforting, like a warm argument with an old friend. You're seated among poets' janissaries on leave, disgraced bureaucrats, and one guy who might be a spy but is definitely enjoying the card game. This is where the real empire breathes, not in palaces, but over steaming mugs and whispered complaints. Coffee isn't native to the Ottomans. It comes from Yemen. But once it arrives in the 16th century, the empire is hooked. You trace the spread from Mecca to Cairo to Istanbul, each cup carried by traders with suspiciously twitchy eyes. At first, the authorities are skeptical. It's too stimulating, one judge says. Another murmurs, what if it encourages thinking? For a moment it's banned, then it's unbanned, then banned again. Historians still argue whether the early coffee bans were moral political or just driven by tea lobbyists. In the shop, a man named Yusuf is performing a shadow play. Behind a thin sheet, he makes puppets bicker about taxes and marriage. The crowd roars softly. Satire thrives here. It's quiet rebellion steeped in clove-scented steam. You overhear a whispered limerick about the Grand Vizier's hairpiece. It's terrible. You laugh anyway. These spaces aren't just for idle chatter. They're information hubs. News spreads faster through coffee houses than official channels. One man unfolds a broadsheet from Venice. Another relays rumors about a new rebellion in Egypt. You sip quietly, pretending not to listen, but you're scribbling notes with your eyes. The interiors are simple wooden benches, iron lamps, shelves of mismatched cups. But each space feels curated for conversation. Someone plays a saz in the corner, plucking out lullabies and scandalous songs alike. The walls absorb every verse. You step outside for a moment and find yourself in the narrow alleys of a growing neighborhood. The scent of roasting beans drifts from open windows. Even the cats here seem caffeinated. A group of young men debate philosophy while balancing on rickety stools. One gestures too wildly and topples over. Nobody stops talking. Back inside, an older man lectures on the siege of Vienna. He wasn't there, of course, but that doesn't stop him. If they'd used camels instead of cannons, he insists. A young woman counters with actual historical references. They agree to disagree over another round of cave. Not all coffee houses are equal. Some serve the elite judges and scholars whose turbans are starched like social armor. Others are more democratic, full of artisans and merchants. But all share the same electricity, the feeling that ideas are brewing stronger than the drink. And of course, conspiracies thrive in these sleepy lounges. The government eventually posts informants men who pretend to be philosophers but can't spell logic. You meet one. He nods too much and never finishes his cup. Everyone knows he's a snitch. Nobody minds. They just save the real secrets for the hammam. You stumble into a debate about astrology and taxation. Somehow, Someone claims the stars are why janissaries get paid late. Another insists it's the influence of Venetian cheese smugglers. Nobody wins. Everyone leaves with their dignity intact. As dusk falls, the lights in the coffee house glow like sleepy fireflies. People rise, stretch, and settle their debts with gestures and grumbles. Outside, the city hums, minaret silhouette against a lavender sky. A street vendor offers sweet lokum. You take one. It tastes like almonds and treason. You glance back at the coffee house one last time. Inside, a new group gathers. New stories, new conspiracies, same bitter brew, same warm chaos. The halls are hushed now, long polished corridors lit by flickering oil lamps and lined with doors that never creak. You're deep inside Topkapi Palace, and tonight you're following the softest footsteps of power. No, not the sultan's, not a vizier's. These are the footsteps of a man dressed in black silk and absolute secrecy, the chief black eunuch of the harem. You pass under an arch etched with verses about paradise. Irony? Maybe. Because this is the imperial harem, a space far more political than sensual, far more strategic than seductive. You were expecting scandal. Instead, you find spreadsheets. Well, their 16th century equivalent, the eunuch. Let's call him Mehmed, though his real name was likely erased with his origin, glides silently, keys jangling like wind chimes of authority. He controls access to the women of the palace, but also manages land grants, charities, and royal correspondence. You follow him past velvet curtains and into a maze of inner chambers where diplomacy wears embroidered slippers. The eunuchs here are not merely guards. They're administrators, advisors, kingmakers. Taken as boys from East Africa, castrated and trained in palace discipline, they form one of the most paradoxical institutions in Ottoman history. Historians still argue whether the system gave them real agency or just gilded chains. But tonight, Mehmed walks like a man with absolute purpose. He oversees the education of concubines, not in seduction, but in language, poetry, and politics. You peek into a classroom where a woman recites Persian verses about betrayal while her peers nod approvingly. The Sultan's favorites must be more than beautiful. They must be useful. The chief eunuch's quarters are surprisingly large. He controls vast vakaf or endowment networks, funding everything from soup kitchens to mosques in his name. His signature is feared across provinces. One wrong word from him, and a governor might find himself transferred to a goat-infested valley near the Armenian border. Still, his power exists entirely at the pleasure of the Sultan and the Queen Mother. A single mistake, a lost whisper, could end him. That's why his posture is always perfect, his tone always measured. You watch him practice a bow for 5 minutes, then repeat it. Inside the harem, the women are less idle than legend suggests. You see one weaving, another calculating grain reserves, a third writing a letter to the governor of Damascus. Gossip exists, of course, but it's the kind that could end wars, not start catfights. There's a child, one of the Sultan's sons, running barefoot through the garden courtyard. The chief eunuch scoops him up, gently murmurs a lullaby, and sends him back inside with a nod. Tomorrow, that boy might be heir to an empire. Tonight, he's just chasing pigeons. You attend a quiet ceremony as Mehmed receives a sealed letter. It bears the Tugra Suleiman's calligraphic signature. Orders for a transfer, a promotion, an execution no one knows, no one asks. He tucks it inside his robe and retires without a word. Later, you find yourself in the harem baths. Steam curls around marble pillars. Women laugh, sing, and debate poetry through the mist. The chief eunuch stands at the edge, back turned, ensuring security without ever violating decorum. His silhouette is still as stone. You realize something unsettling. He knows everything. Who's sick? Who's scheming? Who loves whom? Who fears what? Who is running low on jasmine oil? He is the living archive of the harem's heartbeats. At night, you lie awake in a small antechamber, the velvet walls muffling even your breath. Somewhere nearby, Mehmed whispers with a messenger from the Balkans. His voice is calm. His words are final. As dawn breaks over Istanbul, the harem stirs again. Curtains swish, bells chime, and breakfast trays rattle. But none of it moves without him. The road winds through cypress trees and sleepy vineyards as you bounce gently on the back of a mule. You're shadowing an Ottoman tax collector. Yes, a tax collector. Try to contain your excitement. His name is Kemal, and he wears a turban that looks like it holds more secrets than it should. Today, you're touring the provinces, ledger in hand, slippers dusty spirit, mildly curious. The Ottoman tax system is surprisingly calm. No dramatic door kickings, no flaming pitchforks. Just a man, a notebook, and a very patient donkey. You arrive at a village nestled beside a lazy river. The air smells like figs and old promises. Kemal dismounts, greets the local imam, and promptly begins discussing sheep. This is the Timar system in action. Land is granted to soldiers, to Marriots, in exchange for military service and local management. They don't own the land. They just manage it like glorified babysitters with swords. You visit one such to Marriott. His home is modest, his boots polished. He offers you olives and a list of taxable produce, wheat, barley, apricots, and one slightly aggressive goose. Taxes are not paid in coins usually. It's produce labor cloth. You witness a farmer hand over 10 jugs of olive oil with a shrug and a burp. Another offers wool. One man, elderly, philosophical, and missing several teeth, pays in poems. Kemal accepts one with a nod and makes a note, creative yield. The records are meticulous, ledgers written with a calligraphy so beautiful it's insulting to your own handwriting. Every plot of land, every tree, every goat is counted, named, and occasionally complimented. Sturdy goat, Kemal mutters, scribbling. You pass through towns where tax policy blends with social life. In some places, taxes support schools, soup kitchens, public baths. In others, they fund bridges so worn they sigh when stepped on. People grumble, sure, but many accept it. Better than Mongols, one man mutters. You agree. No flaming arrows yet. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman tax system was benevolent bureaucratic genius or low-key extortion in a very nice font. Maybe both. It certainly worked for a while. You reach a coastal town where taxes are collected from fishermen. A man drags in a net of squirming silver, then hands over half to the state. He smiles as he does it. You suspect something's fishy. Kemal records the transaction, then tips his turban in gratitude. Oddest of all, you see tax exemptions. Whole communities, scribes, doctors, certain religious minorities get passes. It's complicated. One Armenian merchant hands over imported silk and receives a bow in return. Another man tries to fake a medical license on a fish wrapper. Denied. And yet, there's poetry to this order, a kind of sleepy rhythm in the numbers. Taxes are seasonal, slow woven into the calendar, like holidays, only less fun. You sit under a fig tree with Kamal as he balances the day's receipts. He sighs. Not enough eggs. Always the eggs. The sun sets as you reach a mountain village. Chickens scatter, children wave, and someone shouts about bread. The scribe sets up a small table, inks his pen, and starts tallying again. No drama, no violence, just line sums and the occasional sarcastic goat. That night, you sleep in a barn. Above you, the stars twinkle like silver coins, taxable probably. A soft cluck from a nearby hen sounds suspiciously like a tax protest. You drift off anyway, dreaming of ledgers, olives, and very stubborn donkeys. Your feet crunch gently on gravel, lined with tulips, thousands of them swaying like tiny satin dancers under the spring breeze. You're strolling through the imperial gardens of Istanbul in the early 18th century, and the empire has entered its most delicate, decorative, and sleepily decadent phase, the tulip era. The air smells of sugar ink and new money. Everything seems touched by pastel rooftops, painted in soft blues robes, embroidered with peach blossoms, and parasols spinning lazily as aristocrats gossip about poetry and imports. This is not your grandfather's Ottoman Empire. This is a party wrapped in a bureaucratic nap. You're attending a soiree at a waterfront pavilion owned by Grand Vizier Nevşehirli Damat Ibrahim Pasha, a name so long it might qualify as a poem. He's the face of this new age, part reformer, part aesthete, full-time lover of well-planned canal systems. As you sip rose sherbet from a porcelain cup that probably costs more than your future, you overhear plans for a new printing press, a fire department, and possibly an Ottoman-style opera. Yes, reforms are underway. Modernization with a flute solo. Schools are being updated, diplomatic missions sent to Paris, and coffee houses filled with sketches of telescopes. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans were genuinely embracing innovation or just playing catch-up in powdered wigs. But tonight, at least they are listening to music beside lantern-lit fountains. The tulip itself becomes more than a flower. It's a symbol, a status badge, a mild obsession. You visit a bulb market and meet a man trading a donkey for a rare striped variety. Another tries to woo a woman with a bouquet priced like a diamond. She looks unimpressed. Smart woman. Architecture follows suit. Pavilions with whimsical domes pop up like luxurious mushrooms. You enter one with gilded ceilings and a floor so polished it reflects your sleepy awe. It's built not for war councils or lawmaking, but for tea. That's it. Just tea. And yet beneath the elegance, there's tension. You overhear murmurs in the market, too French, too soft, too many fountains, not enough cannons. The janissaries aren't thrilled. Neither are the conservative scholars. We were warriors. Someone growls into his soup. You follow a small group of reformers into a salon where they discuss foreign ideas with a mix of curiosity and condescension. A young scribe argues for translated science texts, his elder tuts. But our poetry is already perfect. They compromise on astronomy charts that rhyme. Back at court, the Sultan Ahmed III seems content to ride this floral tide. He hosts tulip festivals, yes, actual festivals, where women in embroidered slippers toss petals from balconies, and men in silk robes try to catch them like soft confetti. One scholar attempts to diagram the ideal tulip symmetry. Another accidentally falls into a koi pond. But as often happens in history, aesthetic peace doesn't last. By 1730, a janissary turned saboteur named Patrona Halil stirs a revolt. You feel it coming: too much silk, not enough steel. Crowds gather, demanding the end of extravagance and the return to real Ottoman values, whatever those are after centuries of everything. The pavilions are torched, the tulips trampled. Damat Ibrahim is executed, possibly with a flower still tucked behind his ear. The dream ends quickly. You walk through the charred remains of a garden pavilion, its dome cracked, its cushions ash. A child picks up a tulip bulb from the rubble. No one stops her. Yet something lingers. Not the flowers, not the soirees, but the idea that an empire could pause for beauty, however briefly. The canals still flow. The printing press, though frowned upon, survives. And somewhere in an old drawer, someone keeps a bulb for next spring, just in case. You sit by the Bosphorus, the water rippling like silk in moonlight. A boat floats by its lanterns dim. The breeze carries a faint floral scent. Or maybe it's just memory. The silence of the desert is broken not by camels or caravans, but by cannon fire. You blink through the dust as French soldiers in tight trousers and skeptical expressions unload crates from ships along the Egyptian coast. It's 1798, and Napoleon Bonaparte has arrived, ruining everyone's nap. You're in Alexandria now, ducking behind date palms as the French claim they've come to liberate Egypt from what it's unclear. The Ottomans technically in charge here seem surprised. The Mamluks who actually run things on the ground seem even more surprised and significantly more irritated. The Battle of the Pyramids follows, despite being fought nowhere near the pyramids. Ottoman allied Mamluks on horseback charge valiantly. Napoleon's troops form neat squares and fire in lazy, disciplined bursts. You wisely stand very far away, near a donkey who seems equally unimpressed by the whole affair. Historians still argue how much the Ottomans knew or understood about Napoleon's plans. Some claim they were caught off guard. Others suggest a slow, diplomatic shrug. Either way, the empire is rattled. For the first time in centuries, a European power has marched onto Ottoman land, not as visitor, but as conqueror. But Egypt is not passive. The local population rebels. Mosques ring out with calls to resist. Scholars issue fatwas. Vendors throw stale bread. You sneak through alleyways where whispers of rebellion mix with the smell of garlic and gunpowder. The city pulses with resistance. Even as Napoleon installs French officials, sets up science institutes, and draws pyramids in his diary, the Ottomans are regrouping. Back in Istanbul, the news trickles in, slowly, mysteriously, like coffee grounds forming bad omens. The Sultan Selim III receives reports wrapped in diplomatic euphemisms, unexpected. French tourism, unscheduled artillery demonstrations. He doesn't panic exactly, but he does start planning reforms. Again, You now ride with Ottoman troops sent to challenge the French alongside British ships. Yes, the British. Strange bedfellows brought together by mutual dislike of Napoleon's ambition. The Ottomans reclaim Cairo briefly. The French retaliate. Someone spills tea, literally. Eventually, after several years of back and forth skirmishes and polite imperial confusion, the French leave. Not because they're defeated outright, but because it's too hot, too messy, and Admiral Nelson blew up their fleet. Napoleon quietly slips back to Europe, claiming victory, and the Ottomans breathe a long, weary sigh. You sit in the aftermath with an Egyptian imam sipping date-sweetened water. He mutters, "They drew our pyramids wrong." You nod. The invasion leaves behind more than rubble. It sparks a realization. The Ottomans are no longer untouchable. If a Corsican general with bad handwriting can shake the empire, who's next back in Istanbul debates rage over military modernization. French translations, European fashion, and the alarming idea of boots with buttons. The Janissaries grumble. The ulema, religious scholars, raise eyebrows. And in some coffee houses, people whisper, "Did you hear?" In France, even bakers argue about democracy. And yet something shifts. Maps are redrawn. Fortresses reinforced. Schools begin to teach not just poetry and calligraphy, but geometry. Slowly, sleepily, the empire opens one eye. You ride back across Anatolia, the wind stirring dust and thoughts. A shepherd waves at you. He's heard of Napoleon. Tall fellow with a hat, he asks. You smile. Close enough. The scent of coal smoke drifts through the Bosphorus mist like a warning. You're back in Istanbul, but the skyline has changed. Steamships puff like grumpy teapots, and telegraph wires stretch across minarets like sleepy spider webs. The Ottoman Empire is trying to modernize. Slowly, awkwardly, often accidentally. You're attending a demonstration of a new steam engine. The crowd is mixed scholars squinting through spectacles. Janissaries frowning with folded arms, and one man just here for the free sherbet. The engine coughs once, then roars to life, scaring a flock of pigeons and a pasha's wig clean off his head. This is the Tanzimat era, beginning in the 1830s, a time of reforms so sweeping they come with printed pamphlets. Sultan Mahmud II, a man with eyebrows sharp enough to cut budgets, leads the charge. He abolishes the Janissary Corps, famously shelling their barracks into history. You visit the site now, a garden, oddly peaceful, and imagine the uniforms turning to smoke. New laws emerge. New schools open. French is suddenly fashionable. Ottoman bureaucrats start wearing trousers. You attend a civil service exam where one nervous scribe faints mid-translation of Voltaire. He's revived with rosewater and offered a slower-paced position. The army is modernized too. Western drills uniforms with buttons a scandal and rifles that jam slightly less often. You march beside a column of recruits down an avenue built just for parades. They look proud, confused, and mildly itchy. Historians still argue whether the Tanzimat was a genuine rebirth or just empire-sized paperwork. Some reforms stick like secular courts and postal service. Others fall apart faster than a sultan's promise. But the attempt is real. You even attend a ribbon cutting for the first Ottoman railway. It connects two towns that don't like each other. no one boards the train. Back in the capital, the bureaucracy blossoms like a tired orchid. Ministries are created. Statistics are gathered. A census is attempted, but no one agrees how old they are. One man insists he was born during the Big Flood. No one knows which one. The reformers believe in data. They create civil codes, school curricula, even tax charts in pie form, though no one eats them. But opposition brews. Religious leaders grumble. Provincial elites resist. And the streets whisper. You pass a wall covered in chalk. Reform is a Western word for confusion. Even the coffee houses are different. You sit in one where pamphlets outnumber pastries. One student loudly praises liberty, while another reminds him he still lives with his mother. Nearby, a government agent pretends to read, but is clearly listening. You tip him a nod. He nods back. Everyone pretends it didn't happen. Meanwhile, the printing press churns. Newspapers spread news and rumors in equal measure. You read an editorial titled, "Why Must Trains Be So Loud?" beneath a poem about bureaucratic boredom. It rhymes badly. The Empire also tries new uniforms for postal carriers, tight-fitting with brass buttons. One carrier blushes. "It's hard to run in these," he whispers. You don't doubt him. And then there are the coffee riots. Yes, riots. You witness one erupt when a tavern switches to imported beans. Too bitter, someone screams. Tables are overturned. A Janissary impersonator is arrested. Calm is restored when the owner switches back to Yemenite roast. Despite everything, you feel change. Streets are straighter. Tax collection is less theatrical. Children recite French verbs with grim determination. And somewhere, a young woman in spectacles drafts a letter to the editor arguing for a library in her village. You end your day watching a steamship leave the harbor. It's late, noisy, and probably half full of misplaced luggage, but it sails. And that in this moment is what matters. Fog settles over Istanbul like an old blanket that nobody's bothered to shake out. The empire is still here, still technically functioning, but you can feel it. Everything is moving slower. The 19th century unfolds in soft sighs and diplomatic memos. Welcome to the sick man of Europe era, where the Ottoman Empire leans heavily on the armrest of history. You begin your day in the foreign ministry, a quiet building that smells of old ink and quiet panic. Inside, Ottoman officials in stiff collars whisper about treaties' spheres of influence and whether or not the Russian ambassador can be trusted with free pastries. Spoiler, he can't. The empire has become an expert in diplomacy by necessity. You sit in on a meeting where 4 men argue about Bulgaria's borders for 6 hours, only to end with, "Let's ask London." There's a map on the wall, so patched and pinned, it looks like it's auditioning for a role in a quilt. The nickname Sick Man of Europe first appears around this time. Historians still argue who coined it, maybe Tsar Nicholas, maybe a bored British journalist. But it sticks. And while the empire resents it, there's an undeniable truth behind the phrase. Borders are shrinking. Revolts are spreading. The treasury wheezes. You follow an Ottoman tax officer in the Balkans. His once orderly ledger is a mess of red ink and excuses. They say the tax was eaten by wolves, he mutters. You don't ask. At the same time, new technologies continue creeping in. Telegraph poles dot the countryside like confused trees. Railways stretch awkward but determined into Anatolia. You board a train where every passenger is either asleep or suspicious. A boy sells boiled eggs and nationalist pamphlets. In Istanbul, you walk past palaces that look like they belong in Vienna. The architecture is part European mimicry, part Ottoman identity crisis. One minister insists on parquet flooring because it creaks with purpose. Another builds a fountain shaped like a metaphor. No one drinks from it. The empire tries constitutional reform in 1876. A parliament is formed. You sit in on the first session. Half the delegates are unsure what debate means. One reads poetry. Another tries to sell raisins. Within 2 years, the Sultan suspends the whole thing. You aren't surprised. And yet it's not all decline. Education is growing. You visit a girls' school in Izmir, where students recite lines from Voltaire and push for exams in math instead of embroidery. My stitches are fine, one girl declares, but I want to study stars. You silently cheer. Even in politics, ideas stir. The young Ottomans emerge intellectuals who wear fezzes, quote Rousseau, and argue in rhymed prose. They publish journals with names like Truth Liberty and Afternoon Tea. You read one editorial, so convoluted it forms a philosophical pretzel. Meanwhile, the military tries to modernize again. German advisors arrive mostly confused. Where is your supply chain, one asks. The Ottoman general replies, probably having tea. And yet, through it all, the empire persists. Crumbling doesn't mean collapsing. In Bosnia, you witness a wedding where every guest speaks a different language and the bride wears a veil passed down through 6 sultans' reigns. Life goes on even if slowly. You spend your last evening at a harbor cafe. The sea is calm. A violinist plays something vaguely nostalgic. A waiter brings coffee, then forgets to charge you. You watch ships leave Port Russian, French, British. All sharper, faster, newer. But the Ottoman boat, it's still afloat, just quietly. The empire doesn't fall tonight. It just leans a little further into history's cushions, eyes half closed, still listening. The printing presses are hot again, not with poems, but proclamations. You're seated in a smoky room in Salonika, surrounded by young men in trim mustaches and rumpled jackets. This is a secret meeting of the Young Turks, and their tea is as bitter as their manifestos. The air crackles with ambition. These aren't dreamy reformers anymore. They're doctors, officers, journalists, modernists with a grudge. You listen as one slams his cup down and growls, "If the Sultan won't change, then we will." Others nod, scribbling furiously on the backs of receipts and cigarette boxes. It's 1908. And they're not just angry, they're organized. The Committee of Union and Progress Keep is formed, part political party, part underground movement, part very earnest book club. Their goal: restore the Constitution, suspended decades ago, and modernize the empire from within. A coup follows not with swords, but with telegraphs and train schedules. Officers in Macedonia mutiny. Civilians cheer. The Sultan Abdulhamid II finally relents. The 1876 Constitution is reinstated. Parliament reconvenes. And for a brief, breathless moment, the empire stands up straighter. You attend a session of the new assembly. One delegate quotes Rousseau. Another suggests free schooling for girls. Someone shouts about tobacco taxes. Everyone claps, possibly for the wrong reasons. Still, it feels like momentum. But idealism is fragile. Factions splinter. Some want liberal democracy. Others want centralized control. A group forms demanding Islamic revival. Another wants secular reform. Meanwhile, someone steals all the good ink. Historians still argue whether the Young Turks were true revolutionaries or just new bosses in fezzes. Their policies swing wildly, liberty 1 month, censorship the next. Elections are held, then rigged, then revised. You try to follow the coalitions but end up just following the free pastries. Tensions rise. In 1909, another counter-coup erupts. You find yourself hiding behind a stack of newspapers as loyalists try to roll back reforms. The army intervenes again. Sultan Abdulhamid is deposed. His brother Mehmed V is installed, a sultan but mostly symbolic now. Think royal wallpaper with a pension. Meanwhile, the Balkans burn. Nationalist movements grow teeth. One by one, Ottoman territories slip away: Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria. You mark losses on a map until it looks more like a jigsaw puzzle missing pieces. The empire is shrinking fast, and everyone feels it. You ride through villages where the Turkish flag has been quietly replaced by local banners. You speak with shopkeepers, unsure which currency to accept. Depends who's marching, one size. The Young Turks respond with centralization. More control. More surveillance. More nationalism. The ideal of multi-ethnic coexistence is quietly boxed up and replaced with slogans. The press is censored. Dissent is jailed. You meet a poet whose last verse was about oranges. Now, he peels them in silence. Yet, reforms continue. Railways expand. Schools improve. Military training becomes less theatrical. German advisors return less confused this time. Istanbul gets electric trams. You board one next to a woman reading Tolstoy and a man arguing about tariffs. But beneath the surface, the empire is brittle. You see it in the eyes of officers, in the half-finished buildings, in the sighs of postmasters who never receive their ink. You walk past statues still wrapped in cloth because no one can agree what they're celebrating. Then comes 1912, the First Balkan War. Chaos returns. Ottoman troops retreat from Europe. Refugees flood Istanbul. The city's rhythm stutters. The Young Turks tighten control, but the empire's foundations quake. You end the day at a small cafe overlooking the Golden Horn. A child asks if the empire will last. You don't answer. Neither does the waiter, who just refills your tea and stares out at the water like he's waiting for history to blink. The final chapter unfolds not with an explosion, but with the soft shuffle of papers and the tired echo of retreating boots. It's the early 20th century now, and the Ottoman Empire, once a thunderous presence across continents, is collapsing gently into itself. You're in Istanbul, and everything feels like an afterthought. The First World War strikes like a storm, but not everyone hears the thunder. You sit in a cafe. As the news reaches the capital, the empire has entered the war on the side of the Central Powers. A waiter frowns, glances at the teacups, and says, "Again." At first, it seems like history repeating. Grand campaigns are announced with trumpet fanfare and maps drawn in hopeful ink. You ride with a column headed toward the Caucasus boots crunching frost. But nothing goes as planned. Supplies vanish. Roads dissolve. Men freeze before they ever see an enemy. You return to Istanbul to find optimism replaced with ration lines and posters. The city is hung with slogans. Victory is near. But the shops are empty. The post is late. One newspaper prints victory in bold and a retraction the next day in italics. Gallipoli changes things. You walk the trenches alongside young Mustafa Kemal, sharp eyes, clipped sentences, and a stubborn refusal to die. His defense of the Dardanelles becomes legend, even as the wider war spirals into stalemate and sorrow. But while the soldiers fight the empire frays, Armenians are deported by the hundreds of thousands. What follows is whispered, blurred, and horrific. Entire villages vanish. The official records are sparse. The survivors' stories are not. Historians still argue the terminology. The grief does not care. In the Arab provinces, revolts simmer into open flame. You travel south, where Ottoman officials in sweaty uniforms cling to power like wet paper. T.E. Lawrence rides past on a camel trailing myth behind him. Damascus falls. Baghdad, too. The empire's reach shrinks to the edges of a postage stamp. By 1918, Istanbul sits in anxious silence. The war is lost. Allied ships anchor in the Bosphorus like bored wolves. You walk the Galata Bridge and count the flags, not Ottoman, but British, French, Italian. A child asks if those ships are friendly. You don't know what to say. Then, 1920, the Treaty of Sèvres. A document so dissected, redrawn, and cursed that you half expect it to catch fire mid-signature. The empire is carved up colonial mandates, foreign zones, puppet governments. Ottoman sovereignty is reduced to a suggestion. But even now, something stirs. You find yourself in Anatolia again. Smaller towns, hungrier people, sharper voices. Mustafa Kemal, no longer just a commander, has gone rogue. He rallies resistance, forms a new parliament in Ankara, declares independence not with fireworks, but with typewriters and trench coats. You attend a meeting in a dusty room where the chairs don't match. Turkey. Someone says softly, "We'll be born here." It feels absurd. It also feels inevitable. By 1922, the Sultanate is abolished. The last Sultan, Mehmed VI, boards a British ship and sails into exile. No grand farewell, no angry mob. Just a suitcase, a sigh, and the sound of an empire slipping into myth. You stand at the harbor that evening, watching the skyline. Minarets, domes, and chimneys all blur in the dusk. Istanbul is quiet. Not defeated, just changed. The empire is gone. But the city still breathes. Later you walk past a bookstore. In the window, a biography of Suleiman, a guide to Ottoman calligraphy, a cookbook of palace sweets, history for sale, memory preserved. You sit one last time by the Bosphorus. The water is still. The moon rises like an old coin flickering on the surface. A cat curls beside you, purring. Somewhere in the distance, someone sings an old song in an older language. Now, as the waves lap gently along the sea walls of Istanbul, and the last echoes of an empire fade into the soft night air, you let your body sink deeper into stillness. The Ottomans, warriors, dreamers, architects of marble and law, have finally laid down their banners. The domes and minarets remain silent witnesses to 6 centuries of rise and retreat. You think of Osman's dream, beneath the stars, of Suleiman's hammams, and battle maps of shadow puppets in smoky coffee houses and railways built on borrowed time. You remember whispers in palace corridors, tulips blooming briefly before being trampled and steamships puffing toward modernity. History doesn't always end with a bang. Sometimes it sighs. Sometimes it changes its name and waits for dawn. As your breathing slows, the city sleeps too. Lamps flicker behind carved shutters. A night watchman walks his route lantern swaying. In the harbor, ships murmur in their moorings. You close your eyes, hearing the rhythm of centuries in each breath, each soft heartbeat of a world that was. And so you let go of the battles, the reforms, the rustling ledgers, of the sultans and scribes, the courtiers and cooks. You drift now, not away from the empire, but gently through it, carried on its memory, held by its stories, rocked by the quiet current of time. Sweet dreams. Tonight, we're drifting back to the mellow waters of the Ottoman Empire, sometime in the late 1600s. Imagine yourself aboard a stately wooden ship, sails fluttering in the wind, the salty scent of the Bosporus dancing in the air. But hold on, you're not dodging cannonballs or braving tempests. No, your current naval panic is fruit, specifically melons. Yes, you heard right. Entire fleets of serious, well-trained Ottoman sailors found themselves in complete disarray over what might have been someone's snack. Picture this. The moon hangs low over the straits, casting silver ripples over the water. The city's glow flickers on distant hills, and you bundled in robes, trying not to fall asleep at your post spot, a mysterious object bobbing gently in the current. Panic prickles through the deck. Is it a sea mine, a Venetian sabotage device, or just an abandoned cantaloupe from a careless merchant? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and feel free to drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when everyone's tuning in from. The incident that set everything off was quiet and surreal. A cluster of strange objects appeared in the Bosporus, floating in lazy formation. The alarm spread fast, too fast. An overzealous lookout shouted something about enemy mines, and the entire ship lurched into action. Cannons were readied, orders were bellowed, and then someone squinted and recognized the striped green skin of a watermelon. You blink at it, leaning over the edge. The thing bobs innocently. There's another, then a third. Like a slow parade of summer snacks. The tension holds. Sailors argue. Someone suggests shooting one just in case. Another jokes. What if it explodes? Juice all over us. Laughter flutters nervously across the deck. But nobody fires. Not yet. Historians still argue whether this particular scare was documented firsthand or passed down in embellished oral form. What we do know is that multiple reports from the Ottoman Navy in the late 17th century mention increased alertness over suspicious floating objects, which, if you read between the lines, almost certainly refers to produce. At least 3 separate memos from the Grand Admiral's office caution crews to observe all irregularities, especially in waters frequented by fruit barges. Subtle, no, but it was official. As the sun rose that next morning, the threats revealed themselves under full daylight, a mixture of discarded melons, a few bruised gourds, and what may have been a drifting basket of quinces. The crew, now sheepishly quiet, resumed their duties, though several kept side eyes trained on the lingering fruit for hours. Quirky as it sounds, this episode captures the strange crossroads of technology, psychology, and produce. Early naval warfare relied heavily on instinct. You didn't always know what you were seeing, and hesitation could be deadly. But as you'll soon learn, in the Ottoman Navy, overreaction was sometimes just as dangerous as enemy fire, especially when fruit was involved. You stroll through the heart of 16th century Constantinople, your sandals brushing across sun-warmed cobblestones. It's market day, and the air is thick with the scent of cinnamon roasted lamb and overripe melon. Baskets overflow with fruits, striped watermelons, pale green honeydews, musky cantaloupes, all stacked with almost comic abundance. Merchants shout over one another, praising the sweetness of their stock. Children dart between stalls occasionally, snatching a plum or fig when the seller isn't looking. This isn't just a market, it's a sensory overload. And for the Ottoman Navy, it's a nightmare waiting to happen. You pause at a melon cart where the seller, a sunburnt man in a mustard yellow caftan, smacks his wares like they're drums. Solid like a cannonball, he boasts. You raise an eyebrow. Too solid. Perhaps naval officers passing through the area have grown increasingly concerned about these very displays. Not because they hate melons, on the contrary, many adored the fruit, but because more than once, carts of unsold produce had been dumped into the river. And from there, it floated straight into naval patrol zones. A curious pattern begins to emerge. Fleets on high alert near Constantinople frequently report melon sightings. These aren't random fruit, they claim they're perfectly timed distractions. Could melon merchants be working with spies? Could the fruit be used to cover up genuine sabotage? No evidence ever surfaced, but you can't help noticing that around the same time, prices on melons in the city mysteriously spiked. Was it fruit-driven inflation, or an under-the-table agreement to not dump unsold melons into restricted waters? The Grand Vizier's office even held a hearing on the issue. Imagine a circle of stern bureaucrats debating the logistics of melon disposal. We must not let careless fruit jeopardize our naval integrity, one report solemnly states. It's not satire, it's statecraft. Historians still debate whether these fears were rooted in actual plots or were simply a case of anxiety run amok. Some argue that the Ottoman elite, long preoccupied with the complexities of European warfare, had grown jittery about their own borders, and a bobbing melon in the hazy pre-dawn mist could look like a floating barrel of explosives. You stroll onward, the city's noises fading behind you, but the absurdity lingers. Somewhere between paranoia and practicality, the Ottoman naval strategy had absorbed fruit into its threat matrix. You stop at the water's edge. Downriver, a melon bobs against a wooden post minding its own business. But in the mind of a nervous captain, it's a ticking time bomb. And in a way, maybe it is. The deck creaks beneath your feet as you board a mid-sized Ottoman patrol vessel docked along the Bosporus. It's not quite dawn yet, and the sky is painted in soft violet streaks. Sailors mutter quietly over cups of bitter coffee, rubbing their eyes and preparing for another day of hopefully non-lethal tedium. You make your way to the stern, where a lookout is already posted, squinting into the misty expanse. Suddenly, a shout from the bow breaks the sleepy calm. Object in the water. Astern, port side instantly, men spring into action. Coffee sloshes to the deck, sabers clink, and the bosun starts barking commands. You hustle over to the rail heart, picking up pace, not out of fear exactly, but out of sheer curiosity. What are the odds? You peer down into the water. There it is, something round green and gently bobbing. A melon, the ship's officer of the watch. A man with magnificent eyebrows and a voice like gravel calls for a halt. Hold your fire, he says. Could be nothing, could be bait. You half expect him to say, could be breakfast. Anxious whispers ripple among the crew. One sailor swears the enemy has developed floating powder barrels disguised as fruit. Another mutters that last week, a similar object turned out to be a melon with barnacles. A third chimes in, but it smelled like vinegar and sulfur. The paranoia is infectious. Historians still argue whether Ottoman naval training ever officially included a protocol for melon misidentification, but anecdotal evidence strongly suggests it did. Several journals reference crew debates about whether to approach, shoot, or ignore floating objects. More than once, men were disciplined for wasting powder on fruit, but you're here now watching it play out in real time. After much deliberation, a sailor is selected to retrieve the object using a long hook. He leans precariously over the rail, extends the pole, and splash pulls it aboard. The melon rolls onto the deck like an unruly cannonball. Everyone stares. The deck falls silent. Then a soft thunk. Someone nudges it with a boot. No explosion, no hissing. Just a mild, fruity aroma. Relief floods the air, quickly replaced by embarrassment. The officer orders the melon removed. Someone suggests eating it, but the commander insists, no, we don't dine on potential threats. Later that evening, as stars blanket the sky and the crew settles back into routine, you overhear a conversation between two junior sailors. One sighs and says, "Remember when the enemy was like other ships?" The other nods solemnly. Now, it's produce. You chuckle, but also understand. Naval discipline and pride run deep, and so does fear. And when the line between caution and absurdity blurs, even a cantaloupe can feel like a cannonball. You wake to a ruckus on deck. Not the alarm bells of enemy fire, but something subtler, more ridiculous. It starts with a question shouted through a spyglass cannonball or cantaloupe. That's your morning wake-up call aboard this jittery Ottoman vessel. The sun peaks over the horizon, casting gold flecks on the waves. A series of round floating shapes trails ahead. Again. You shuffle toward the rail with a familiar sigh. The captain is already pacing, muttering it's happening again. He's referencing, of course, the now weekly spectacle of Fruit Panic Day. Sailors gather pointing and speculating. Some swear the roundness is too perfect, too manufactured. That one's definitely packed with powder, says one. Another replies, then you swim out and check. It's an honest problem, really. You glance at your naval manual, dog-eared and stained. Tucked in the back is a memo hastily copied. In light of recent confusion between explosive and organic objects, all floating spheres are to be approached with caution unless clearly punctured or hollow sounding. Helpful? Not exactly. A group is dispatched with poles and nets. You trail behind as they launch a rowboat to retrieve the suspected threats. The rowing is silent ceremonial even. There's a reverence to this absurd ritual now, like retrieving cursed relics rather than discarded groceries. The lead sailor snags the first object. It wobbles in the net-striped skin, waxy sheen firm to the touch. Another melon, another sigh. But this one is different. One sailor leans in and notes it has a carved notch in the side. "That's not normal," he mutters. "Could it be modified?" A spy's trick. Historians still argue whether any actual melon bomb hybrids existed, but rumors persisted. One tale described a hollowed melon packed with black powder designed to detonate upon impact. Scholars consider it implausible melons lack structural integrity after all, but the myth endured. You lean closer. Turns out the notch is just a bite mark. Some poor merchant had likely nibbled it, found it overripe, and tossed it into the current. The Navy, on edge and underslept, assumed espionage. The rowboat returns, crew grim-faced but melon-laden. The captain orders the deck scrubbed, the logs updated, and the fruit composted in accordance with naval hygiene policy. You suspect he just doesn't want it mentioned in the report. Back on deck, an older sailor shares a theory. They send them, Venetians, melon bombs, to mock us. You nod, as if convinced. In war, even jokes can be weapons. Later, during a lull in duty, one sailor starts carving a face into another melon. The resemblance to a certain officer is uncanny. Laughter spreads in hushed tones. The melon rolls gently with the ship's sway, as if quietly judging your entire fleet. The mood lightens, but the lesson sticks in a world where the shape of a threat changes daily. Sometimes your worst enemy is your own imagination. It's a heavy day on the Bosporus, both weather-wise and morale-wise. The air hangs damp and still as your ship patrols the familiar channel. You're back at your post, one hand on the rail, the other shading your eyes as you scan the water. You're not looking for sails or smoke or enemy signals. No, you're watching for melons. The admiral stands at mid-deck, wrapped in layers of brocade, far too elaborate for the heat. His beard is immaculately combed, his scowl professionally permanent. Today, he faces a familiar and thoroughly ridiculous dilemma: to shoot or not to shoot the fruit. Two rounded objects drift toward the fleet's edge. One is clearly a watermelon, the other is harder to classify. The admiral calls his advisors together. You approach slowly, staying on the fringe, ears perked. The debate is not unlike a council of war. "Too perfect," says one officer. "That's not a real melon." But the stripes counters another. They're irregular, realistic, might just be a bad melon. The Venetians could be disguising charges again, someone mutters, and the admiral groans audibly. The Venetians, he says dryly, are busy bankrupting themselves with lace imports. I doubt they're crafting artisanal melon bombs. Still, no one wants to make the final call. Historians still argue whether naval paranoia was exacerbated by recent innovations in sea warfare. Floating charges, primitive naval mines, were becoming more common in the Mediterranean. Some resembled barrels or kegs, but accounts from the period hint at smaller, subtler devices being tested. A few logs refer to round cargoes of concern, suggesting more than a few false alarms. You notice the admiral staring off into the distance, his hand twitching near his saber. He's tired, and in the face of floating fruit, no amount of rank gives him clarity. Eventually, he waves a hand. "Shoot it," he orders. The gun crew readies. A single cannon is aimed. You plug your ears out of habit. Boom! The melon explodes in a satisfying splash. No fire, no boom, just pulp raining down on the deck. Bits of rind hit the admiral's robe. He sighs, brushes it off with dignity. "Write it up as potential threat neutralized," he says, walking away. The crew exchanges glances. You can almost hear the collective thought. Again. That evening, during supper, melon slices appear on the mess table. One sailor holds his slice suspiciously, sniffs it, and whispers Venetian trickery. Laughter erupts. But even in jest, the fear lingers. The admiral's dilemma isn't over. Tomorrow, another fruit might float by. And in a fleet where nobody wants to be wrong about melons or mines, every decision, no matter how fruity, carries weight. The day starts innocently enough. You're strolling along the docks, enjoying a rare morning of shore leave. Seagulls bicker overhead, and the scent of brine mixes with roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. As you turn a corner, a scene unfolds that you could never have anticipated. 3 furious melon merchants shouting at a group of flustered naval guards, gesturing wildly at the water. Apparently, someone or several someones had dumped a full cart of unsold melons directly into the harbor. This in itself was not especially newsworthy, but the tide carried them straight into a nearby naval checkpoint, triggering what is now being called, only half-jokingly, the Great Fruit Stand Crisis. You catch up with the story back aboard your assigned vessel. The Night Watch spotted an advancing flotilla of round green threats at approximately 2 bells past midnight. They sounded a general alarm. Nearby ships joined the chaos. At least 2 cannons were discharged. One watchman attempted to light a beacon, which accidentally triggered a fire aboard a fishing skiff. Nobody was seriously hurt, but a great deal of pride was. Historians still argue whether the Navy's response was justified. Naval records from the week describe an unusually dense concentration of round aquatic clutter and note public carelessness resulting in potential strategic confusion. One report gently suggests that naval staff consider alternative identification methods before discharging artillery. Back in the marketplace, tempers flare. The melon vendors insist that dumping their excess wares into the water has been tradition for decades, believed to bring luck and appease river spirits. The Navy insists it's sabotage, or at best, criminal negligence. You're assigned to the mediation committee. Imagine it, sailors and melon men seated on opposite sides of a low table, drinking tepid coffee and trying not to insult each other. The naval representative, a humorless lieutenant with a suspicious stain on his collar, opens with, "Your fruits threaten national security." The merchant replies, "Your cannons threaten fruit." It doesn't go well. Eventually, the city council intervenes. A temporary ban on river dumping is enacted. Melon waste must now be collected and disposed of inland. A fine is instituted, though it's unclear who enforces it. You hear rumors of a fruit patrol being formed, but you suspect it's mostly theater. Still, The crisis changes things. Ships now carry illustrated manuals showing common fruit types. A few sailors start calling melons soft mines. One wag paints little faces on the ones he finds and names them after naval officers. You can't help but smile. Somewhere between the absurdity and the bureaucracy, a strange peace is reached. But deep down, you know this isn't the last time fruit and firepower will collide. The ship drifts silently along the moonlit strait. You're on night duty again, wrapped in a wool cloak and nursing a lukewarm mug of tea. It's quiet, the kind of quiet that unsettles sailors more than any battle. And yet, tonight's mission is no ordinary patrol. It's a lesson. The crew is gathered for a retelling of Ottoman explosive lore, a strange tradition meant to prepare new recruits for the unexpected. You settle in as the ship's oldest mate, Mustafa. His beard as white as foam steps forward and begins. Long before you floated on this vessel, long before we feared cantaloupes, he says, the real sea mines looked even sillier. He gestures toward a crate of props, wooden spheres, hollow gourds, and an actual watermelon. You blink. Props. Yes, this is half lesson, half theater. The first tales are grounded in fact. Ottoman engineers experimented with explosive barrels and oil-filled flasks sealed in tar and pitch. These were released to drift into enemy harbors, ideally detonating near hulls. Some designs involved long-burning fuses wrapped in pigot casing. Others had glass triggers that shattered under pressure. One allegedly was shaped like a cooking pot. You try to imagine spotting a steaming pot drifting toward your ship. Would you assume it was lunch or death? But then Mustafa shifts gears. And then came the pomegranate device, he says, winking. No official records confirm this, but oral accounts describe a cluster of pomegranates filled with sulfur powder bound together by goat twine designed to scatter on contact like ancient depth charges. Historians still argue whether this was real or an elaborate sailor's prank. Still, it's been passed down for generations, and that counts for something. One recruit snorts. Why not apples stuffed with gunpowder? Mustafa doesn't flinch. We tried that. They kept sinking. The crew laughs, but the tension lingers. For every joke, there's a kernel of truth. You recall stories of 16th century Venetian divers planting underwater charges beneath Ottoman ships, using sheep bladders as flotation aids. Strange times. Stranger methods. As the lesson wraps up, you realize something: the line between real and absurd in naval warfare has always been blurry. If someone floated a bomb, disguised as a squash, would you believe it? Would you fire? You lean on the railing, staring into the inky water, wondering which floating shapes are innocent and which are part of the next chapter in this bizarre arms race. The night is thick with fog, the kind that muffles sound and blurs edges. You're back on patrol, the Bosporus more ghostly than usual. Lanterns flicker dimly, and visibility is barely a ship's length. Tension clings to every timber of the deck. Then a voice cuts through the stillness. Multiple objects starboard. Everyone freezes. You peer into the murk eyes, straining. Shapes are moving, dozens of them low in the water, spaced out like an approaching fleet. The command is swift. Ready the guns. Except, of course, they aren't ships. As the haze shifts, it becomes clear. Melons. A full convoy of them. Maybe 20 bobbing, gently catching the lantern light in that maddening, almost metallic sheen. And for a moment, everyone forgets how to breathe. The officer in charge, a recent academy graduate with a jaw too square to be trusted, assumes the worst. Sabotage, he declares. A distraction. They're covering something. The crew snaps into action, half eager to prove themselves, half dreading the implications. Historians still argue whether this exact event, what would later be nicknamed the floating fruit convoy panic, was orchestrated or coincidental. Some believe local orchard workers accidentally dumped a full load of spoiled melons upriver. Others suspect it was a prank by bored fishermen. One particularly colorful theory accuses Venetian spies of staging it just to test Ottoman naval response time. But to you, standing in that fog, it doesn't matter. What matters is the sheer absurdity of men with swords and muskets trembling before a flotilla of produce. The guns are loaded, but no one fires. One sailor mutters that it feels wrong to shoot at something so sweet. Another suggests boarding one to investigate. A third says, "What if they're poisoned?" That earns him a look, but no retort. Eventually, the admiral summoned mid-nap arrives and surveys the situation. His eyes narrow. His robe is inside out. He says nothing for a long time. Then finally, "If this is a trap, it is the most delicious one I've ever seen." The crew chuckles. The mood breaks. A rowboat is dispatched. The fruits are collected, inspected, and after much debate, chopped up for supper. You chew your slice slowly, savoring the cool, grainy sweetness. And yet the logs record the night differently. Officially possible foreign interference was noted. A new line is added to the patrol guide. Investigate all floating produce with caution. Avoid wasteful engagement unless melon exhibits signs of tampering. It's not the last time you'll face fruit under fire. But it's the first time you realize how much fear relies on fog silence and the wild stories we tell ourselves when we don't know what we're seeing. Morning comes with paperwork. Not cannon fire, not fog, not enemy sails, but parchment stamps and frowns. You're seated below deck at a long table with ink-stained sailors, each hunched over yet another revision of the new naval guidelines, Floating Object Identification Protocol, Edict 2. It's official. Melons are now a bureaucratic concern. After the latest fruit incident, the Navy has decided to stop relying solely on instinct. Instead, a list of characteristics will help distinguish between benign fruit and plausible explosives. You skim the draft memo. If the object is spherical but irregular in texture, likely fruit. Round with symmetrical ridges. Investigate for casings. Emits scent of sugar or rot. Fruit. Tethered or gliding against current. Possible device. Bears teeth marks. Presumed snack. You raise an eyebrow. Teeth marks, someone shrugs. Better safe than sticky. A crusty officer stands at the front reading aloud from his own notes with grave solemnity. Henceforth, he declares any spherical object larger than a hen's egg and smaller than a cannonball must be subjected to visual analysis, scent test, and if necessary, a poke. You try not to laugh, but fail. Historians still argue whether the fruit protocols, as they came to be known, were a serious attempt at reform, or just naval theater meant to save face. Copies of the document survive in archives annotated with snarky marginalia, like ad figs or grapes. Don't float ignore. One record even includes a sketch of a particularly smug-looking cantaloupe. The Admiralty takes it very seriously, though. A fruit taxonomy chart is issued to every ship. Illustrations show friendly melons, suspicious squashes, and one dreaded unknown gourd believed to have caused panic off roads. Soon after training drills begin, sailors are lined up and quizzed with wooden models, pumpkin or pressure mine durian or barrel charge. Laughter echoes down the corridors, but so does a quiet sense of pride. At least they're prepared now. Maybe. Back on deck, you overhear a young sailor reciting the new rhyme. If it floats and it smells, it's a snack from the swells. If it hums or it shines, it's a trick of our lines. You smile. It's silly, but it's working. That night, when another melon appears in the water, no one panics. The crew identifies it, nets it, logs it, and composts it all without drawing a sword. And for the first time in weeks, the ship sleeps without twitching at the sound of splashes. You're posted ashore today, enjoying the relative calm of the Constantinople harbor quarter, until, of course, chaos returns in the form of yelling. Loud, melodic, and very, very angry yelling. You follow the noise to the city's central records hall, where an improbable delegation has assembled. 4 melon merchants, wrapped in stained aprons and smelling faintly of sugar and vinegar, stand fuming at the clerk's window. One is brandishing a half-crushed fruit like a weaponized exhibit. They've come to file a formal protest against the Navy. Turns out, last week's patrol boat incident did more than bruise naval pride. It also destroyed a merchant's entire floating delivery of high-end melons en route to a sultan's summer feast. The sailors, panicked and overzealous, had intercepted the cargo midstream and blasted it into fruit salad. The merchants are demanding compensation. 12 crates of imperial-grade honeydews. The lead vendor barks vaporized by people who can't tell a melon from a mine. The clerk tries to maintain order, but it's hard to argue with a man waving fruit pulp and signed invoices. You scan the protest letter. It's official, complete with wax seal and florid Ottoman calligraphy. The demands include not just repayment, but a guarantee that fruit-bearing barges will be granted naval safe passage and wonderfully mandatory melon education for all deck officers. Historians still argue whether this protest actually reached the Divan Council, or whether it was smothered in bureaucracy and composted with the rest of the evidence. But what's certain is that after this moment, fruit incidents began to be taken slightly more seriously, if only for legal reasons. Back on the docks, gossip spreads fast. Sailors crack jokes about being suited by fruit, and one even sketches a cartoon, a naval cannon apologizing to a watermelon. You see copies posted on supply crates. Later that week, a new regulation is quietly circulated. Naval personnel shall verify the origin and ownership of floating goods before engaging. It's a small victory for the melon vendors and a soft slap on the wrist for the Navy. But the tension's not over. You overhear one officer mutter, "Next they'll want a fruit escort brigade." Another replies, "Honestly, cheaper than another incident." As night falls and you head back to the ship, the harbor seems calm again. A barge rows past piled high with carefully netted melons. It sports a large banner, "Not a threat." You tip your hat. Message received. You're on assignment at the Naval Training Grounds just outside Constantinople, a quiet patch of land where drills echo and wooden dummies take more beatings than they deserve. But today's lesson isn't swordsmanship or sail knotting. Today's lesson is melon recognition. You sit among a circle of squinting cadets, all blinking in disbelief, as a stern-faced instructor unfurls a large illustrated scroll titled Common Produce, Mistaken for Naval Threats. On it, detailed paintings of watermelons, cantaloupes, gourds, and something that suspiciously resembles a very angry pumpkin. Each image is labeled with size, buoyancy rating, and panic index. The instructor begins, "Gentlemen, you may laugh, but this knowledge may one day save your ship." A few cadets chuckle anyway. They're silenced by the arrival of a barrel marked live training fruit. One by one, the cadets are tested. A melon is tossed into a tub. The trainee must identify it out loud and state whether it should be netted, shot, or ignored. Some guess confidently cantaloupe, ignore others hesitate. One poor soul mistakes a squash for a firebomb and tackles it. You're not sure whether to laugh or applaud. Historians still argue whether this kind of training was ever officially mandated by the Ottoman Admiralty, or merely concocted by overzealous officers hoping to reduce embarrassment. Some records mention visual threat drills involving organic decoys. One particularly skeptical historian described it as a culinary farce masquerading as martial readiness. But there's no denying that fruit spotting is now part of the curriculum. After the drills, you follow the cadets to the mess hall. On the wall is a new poster, "Know Your Enemy," from eggplants to explosives. It's both hilarious and oddly comforting. One cadet mutters, "We're trained to fight pirates and peel produce." Another replies, "Better than the other way around." Later on the practice dock, a mock melon encounter is staged. A barrel disguised with painted stripes floats into view. The response team debates heatedly explosive decoy or decorative gourd. They compromise hook it and poke it gently. It turns out to be a fruit basket dropped by a nearby kitchen barge. The incident is logged. The cadets are praised for restraint. As the sun sets, you realize that this exercise, silly as it seems, represents something rare a Navy adapting, learning, and maybe laughing just enough to stay sane. You're stationed at the Imperial Docks today, just in time to witness a curious scene, a delegation of European envoys, Polish Venetian, and even a very stiff Prussian arriving to inspect Ottoman naval operations. It's supposed to be a display of strength and dignity. Instead, it becomes a polite masterclass in international smirking. The visitors are given a tour of the docks where a meticulously staged demonstration is underway. Sailors stand in neat formation. Cannons are gleaming. Flags flutter crisply. And then, just as the admiral is describing improvements in naval alertness, a shout goes up. Object in the current. You watch mortified as officers spring into action. A melon bobs lazily in the harbor again. The envoys lean forward fascinated. One even produces a monocle. A junior officer rushes to retrieve it, with a pole visibly sweating. The melon is raised, inspected, and declared non-threatening. The declaration is met with nods from the sailors and barely concealed grins from the foreign guests. The Polish envoy whispers something to his interpreter. You catch the phrase, fruit-based defense doctrine. The Venetian bites his lip to stop a laugh. The Prussian says nothing, but his mustache twitches suspiciously. Historians still argue whether these visits influenced European naval practices. There's no proof that other nations adopted melon recognition drills, but diaries from the period note a peculiar Ottoman obsession with floating fruit. One Prussian aide later wrote, "They fear not the storm, nor the shell, but the gourd adrift." As the tour continues, you trail behind the group. The admiral, trying to salvage the moment, pivots to a speech about maritime vigilance. But just then, another melon appears. This one is pinkish, bobbing beside a docked skiff. The sailors freeze. The admiral grimaces. "Ignore it," he whispers. "It's decorative." It's not. It's just a badly bruised melon. Still no one moves. You and the envoys stand in awkward silence, all eyes on the fruit. Eventually, a seagull lands on it, pecks twice, and flies away. The spell breaks. You catch the Venetian grinning again. "At least they're prepared," he says. Back at the officers' mess, sailors joke about installing a melon alarm system, Melon Bell Mark II. Someone sketches a melon with a naval hat. Another sailor composes a limerick. "There once was a melon at sea that frightened a captain in three. They poked it with sticks, declared it not tricks, and logged it in triplicate. See." That evening, as the envoys leave, they do so with courteous bows and deliberately neutral expressions. But you know they'll be telling this story for years. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. The moon is high and the sea is calm, but the ship's quartermaster is restless. You sit beside him in the officers' quarters, poring over maintenance logs, when he slides over a thick leather-bound volume with a smirk. "You ever read the funny ones?" he asks, tapping the book's spine. It's the ship's formal incident log, meant to record engagements damage and maritime anomalies. But as you flip through the pages, you find yourself in a goldmine of absurdity. There it is, an entire section titled Fruit Events. The entries start dry. Observed spherical drift object, neutralized with cannon fire, recovered muskmelon, logged and discarded. Floating squash identified as non-hostile. But then things start to change. One entry reads, "Engaged probable watermelon." Result sticky deck. Morale improved. Another adds, "Encountered gourd." Looked suspicious. Turned out to be dinner. Historians still argue whether these entries were acts of defiant satire or quiet rebellion against a bureaucracy that took itself too seriously. Regardless, the logs take on a life of their own. Soon, sailors start embellishing the reports. One refers to hostile produce flotillas. Another logs a pomegranate panic incident. False alarm jam-related. A particularly artistic entry includes a charcoal sketch of a melon in a tricorn hat. The admiral eventually notices. He isn't amused at first. He issues a formal reprimand. The incident log is not a comic journal. The next entry reads, "Received reprimand. Morale decreased. Melon unbothered." But something curious happens. The jokes once hidden are now institutionalized. The admiral's own reports start to show signs of irony. Observed cantaloupe. Observed sailors observing cantaloupe. No cannon use. Growth noted in restraint and judgment, possibly spiritual. The crew adopts a motto unofficially: "Of course, fear the fruit, but never let it see you sweat." It's etched onto a wooden plaque in the galley right above the soup pots. One night, after too much plum wine, a sailor pens a sea shanty. Oh, the melon. She rolls on the tide with her secrets and seeds deep inside. We don't shoot no more, we just watch from the shore and salute her with wary-eyed pride. You fall asleep that night to the soft creak of wood and the whisper of the sea. Somewhere on deck, someone's carved a grinning face into a gourd and left it by the compass. You're not sure if it's meant to be a joke or a new guardian idol. Either way, it feels right. It's just past midnight and the sea is glass. The kind of eerie stillness that makes even seasoned sailors pause before speaking. You're aboard a small escort ship patrolling near the mouth of the Dardanelles. It should be routine. It never is. A lookout murmurs, "Something's moving." You peer into the darkness, and there it is, round pale and rolling with slow menace. It's another melon, but this one feels different. The crew snaps to attention, eyes narrow. This isn't just any melon. It's a lone, large, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The lookout whispers, "That's not a fruit, that's an omen." The commander approaches, robes rustling, his face tight with dread. This again, he mutters, but doesn't laugh. He remembers the other incidents. The fruit that tricked us in Smyrna, the honeydew debacle of Rhodes. He's seen too many supposed snacks nearly cause mutinies. Historians still argue whether this final melon panic was recorded honestly or retroactively dramatized by bored clerks. But several documents agree a naval operation intended to intercept smuggler vessels was delayed 2 full hours due to unverified spherical object interference. Tonight, that interference rolls calmly beside the hull. A small debate ensues. One sailor wants to hook it, another wants to ignore it. A third simply stares at it, whispering a quiet prayer to St. Nicholas. Eventually, a midshipman leans over with a gaffing pole and gently taps it. No explosion, no alarm, just a hollow, soft thunk. The melon turns slowly in the water, revealing a curious mark, a carved spiral. Gasps ripple across the deck. Venetian sigil, someone mutters, occult symbol. The commander steps forward and squints. That, he says, is the rind cracking. They fish it out. It's a honeydew, overripe, probably dumped from a barge upstream. Still, the damage is done. The smuggler interception fails. By the time the fleet resumes movement, the contraband ship has vanished into the haze. The log reads delays due to navigational confusion caused by unidentified melon-like object. No punishment is issued, no fingers are pointed, but the legend spreads. By morning, it's all anyone talks about. The last melon panic, they call it, the end of an era. You overhear 2 young sailors reminiscing. Remember when the sea just had sharks? The other shrugs. Sharks don't float like that. That evening, a quiet ceremony takes place. A barrel of composted fruit is pushed into the water with a soft splash. It drifts peacefully toward the horizon. You watch it go, half expecting it to turn around and come back. Morning breaks with a kind of golden stillness. The water glimmers, the gulls wheel lazily overhead, and you, seasoned, steady, no longer startled by spherical produce, lean against the rail, watching the crew move with quiet efficiency. It's peaceful, strangely so. Today, the ship isn't bristling with tension. There are no drills, no shouts about possible aquatic invaders. The fruit checklist lies folded on a barrel, sun-bleached and barely referenced. It seems the age of melon panic is finally ending. Behind you, two officers share tea. No fruit sightings all week. One remarks. The other nods. I miss it honestly. The change didn't happen overnight. It began with a few city ordinances, most notably a new composting policy that required all unsold produce to be taken to municipal gardens, not dumped in the river. It sounds laughable, but it worked. Historians still argue whether the calm came from improved naval awareness or better waste management. Either way, the melon sightings declined, and with them, the panic. Now, the Navy has returned to more conventional concerns: smugglers, minor pirates, sea conditions. Fruit has faded into memory and into bureaucracy. A footnote in naval handbooks. A quiet joke in academy lectures. But traces remain. You notice a painted gourd nailed above the captain's quarters, smiling slightly cracked. A mascot of sorts. Below it, a tiny plaque: Fear the fruit, trust the crew. In the mess hall, sailors share old stories. The honeydew that delayed a siege. The cantaloupe that received a full honors burial. The watermelon that got promoted in jest. You sit among them, sipping warm, oversweet tea, letting their laughter wash over you like a tide. These memories, absurd, sincere, oddly beautiful, have become part of your world now. Part of what binds the crew. A shared, sticky absurdity. Outside, a small fishing skiff rows by its net, full of ordinary fish, and one rogue melon. The sailors glance, pause, then shrug. No panic, no cannon, just peace. The sun dips lower, and the ship glides onward through a sea as calm as glass. The creaking of the timbers, the steady lap of water against the hull. Everything slows, now softens. The crew, once restless, now moves with that gentle certainty born from familiarity. Somewhere below deck, a faint lullaby begins, an old sailor's tune. Nothing fancy, just a few hummed bars about rivers, about winds, about the old days when even melons were monsters. You close your eyes and let the motion of the ship lull you. No alarms now, no floating threats, just the occasional flap of canvas, the scent of salt and citrus hanging on the evening air. The world is still absurd, of course. Sailors will still whisper about the melon flotilla, about the admiral who feared gourds, about the one honeydew that stopped an entire fleet. But they'll whisper with a smile now. In time, even that will fade, become a strange footnote in a dusty logbook, or a bedtime tale for a new cadet. But tonight, it lives on. In this slow drift, in the warm wood beneath your hand, in the peace of knowing that for once, everything is in its place. You shift slightly in your hammock blanket, tucked just right. The lantern flickers low, and somewhere far off, a melon rolls gently into the current, seen noted and left alone.